You know what's worse than being wrong? It's being wrong and thinking you're absolutely, unquestionably right. Think about it. How many times have you met someone who talks like they've got the whole universe figured out? They speak loud. They speak fast. They speak with the kind of confidence that makes you pause and think. Maybe they actually know something I don't. But if you scratch the surface, if you ask one more question, you realize there's nothing underneath. No depth, no wisdom, just noise. Wrapped in certainty. We live in a world drowning in opinions but starving for insight. A world where the loudest person in the room is often the least informed, and the ones who actually know something are usually the quietest. That's not an accident. It's a glitch in how the human mind works. Psychologists David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger uncovered this glitch back in 1999. They ran a series of experiments and found something unsettling. The people who knew the least were the most confident about how much they knew, and the people who knew the most were the ones who doubted themselves. This isn't just a psychological trick, it's a trap. A trap that leads people to overestimate their abilities, underestimate their ignorance, and sometimes drag others down with them. It's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, and once you see it, you start seeing it everywhere. In your office, on social media, at family dinners, in the news, in politics, and sometimes, if you're brave enough to look closely, you might even see it in yourself. Today, we're not just going to talk about this effect. We're going to unpack it, piece by piece. We'll look at why it happens, why it's dangerous, and how ancient philosophers, the Stoics, warned us about this very thing, long before science gave it a name. By the end of this episode, I want you to be able to recognize the most dangerous kind of confidence, not just in others, but in yourself. Because the real danger isn't ignorance. It's ignorance disguised as certainty. So, take a deep breath. Let's begin. Confidence is a funny thing. When you see someone standing tall, speaking with conviction, looking you dead in the eye, and telling you they know exactly how things work, your brain wants to believe them. Confidence feels like competence, but they're not the same. In fact, sometimes they're opposites. There's a moment in everyone's life. Maybe you felt it too. When you learn just enough about something to feel like an expert, you read a few articles about nutrition, and suddenly you're correcting your friend's diet. You watch a few videos about investing, and now you're giving stock advice at dinner. You memorize a few buzzwords about psychology, and you're ready to diagnose everyone around you. It feels good. It feels empowering. But what you're actually experiencing is the peak of ignorance. There's even a name for that moment. Psychologists call it the peak of Mount Stupid. It's the first bump in the Dunning-Kruger curve where knowledge is low, but confidence is sky high. Because here's the trick. When you know very little about a subject, you don't know enough to realize how much you don't know. You're blind to your own blind spots. It's like looking at the ocean from the shore and thinking you understand the sea, without realizing how deep, how vast, how unpredictable it really is. And this illusion isn't accidental. It's how our brains are wired. When we lack knowledge, we also lack the ability to recognize our lack of knowledge. This is why the Dunning-Kruger effect is not just a flaw, it's a double blind. You don't know, and you don't know that you don't know. That's why ignorance speaks so loudly. That's why when you scroll through social media, the people who yell the most, post the most, argue the most, are rarely the ones who actually know what they're talking about. Because real knowledge, real wisdom, doesn't shout. It whispers. It questions. It doubts. The ancient Stoics knew this long before psychology did. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." They understood that true strength comes not from knowing everything, but from knowing how little you actually know. So why do we fall for this illusion of confidence? Because it feels safe. Certainty is comfortable. Doubt is uncomfortable. But here's the paradox. The people who are sure of everything are usually the ones who've looked the least. And the people who doubt themselves are the ones who've seen how deep the rabbit hole really goes. The Dunning-Kruger Effect is not about stupidity. It's about human nature. And once you understand how easily confidence can masquerade as competence, you start to see the illusion everywhere. You start to question the experts on TV, the loud voices online, even your own opinions. And that's where real learning begins. Because wisdom doesn't start with knowing. It starts with not knowing. Imagine a curve. On one side, the x-axis, is your actual knowledge. On the other, the y-axis, your confidence. At the very start, you know nothing. You're aware that you know nothing. Confidence is low. But then, you learn a little, just enough to get a taste. And suddenly, your confidence skyrockets. You feel like you've cracked the code, like you've connected all the dots. You're standing at the top of what psychologists call Mount Stupid. It's the most dangerous place to be, because from up there, everything looks simple. The world feels black and white. You think you figured it out, and worst of all, you stop looking for answers because you believe you already have them. But the truth? You're not standing on solid ground. You're standing on thin ice. And the moment life throws something real at you, a failure, a challenge, a situation that doesn't fit your simple model, that confidence cracks, and you fall straight down the curve into what Dunning and Kruger called the Valley of Despair. This is the moment when you finally realize you didn't know as much as you thought. It's painful. It's humbling. For some, it's even paralyzing. Many people never make it past this point. They give up. They shut down. Or worse, they retreat back to the top of Mount Stupid, pretending the fall never happened. But if you choose to stay in that valley, if you choose to look around, you'll notice something interesting. You'll start to see the gaps in your knowledge. You'll realize how much there is to learn. And slowly, very slowly, your competence begins to grow. But this time, your confidence grows too. Not like before, not in a straight line. It grows with caution, with humility. That's the path to mastery. The long, slow climb up the right side of the curve. You'll never get back to the blind, naive confidence of Mount Stupid, but you'll develop something far more valuable. Quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need to shout. The kind that recognizes how much it doesn't know, and how much there always is to learn. The Stoics understood this long before there were graphs or psychology papers. Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." That's the heart of the Dunning-Kruger curve. When you think you already know, you stop listening, you stop learning, you stop growing. And that's where the danger lies. Because while you're standing on Mount Stupid, waving your flag of certainty, you're not just fooling yourself, you're fooling everyone who listens to you. You're making decisions, giving advice, leading others. Without realizing you're leading them off a cliff. Look around. Our world is full of people stuck at the peak of that curve. Politicians, influencers, commentators, friends, family, sometimes ourselves. They speak with confidence, but confidence isn't competence. And when the stakes are high, when lives, livelihoods, or futures are on the line, that kind of blind certainty becomes dangerous. Because confidence convinces, even when it's wrong. And the higher you are on that curve, the harder the fall. So why is this curve so dangerous? Why is the Dunning-Kruger effect more than just a funny chart on the internet? Because in the real world, confidence has consequences. Think about it. Who do we listen to? Who do we follow? Who do we trust? Most of the time, it's not the most knowledgeable. It's the most confident. The one who speaks loudest, the one who looks certain, the one who has no doubt. And here's the scary part. The less they know, the more certain they sound. That's how misinformation spreads. That's how bad leaders rise. That's how terrible decisions get made. Let me give you a real-world example. In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler walked into two banks in Pittsburgh and robbed them, in broad daylight, with no mask. When he was arrested, Hours later, he was shocked. He genuinely believed he couldn't be seen on the security cameras. Why? Because he had rubbed lemon juice on his face, thinking it would make him invisible. It sounds ridiculous, but this story is what actually inspired Dunning-Kruger's research. Because Wheeler wasn't mentally ill. He was just so uninformed. He didn't even realize how uninformed he was. Now, most of us aren't robbing banks with lemon juice on our faces, but this same effect plays out every single day. On social media, people with zero medical background suddenly become health experts during a pandemic. People who've never studied finance give bold investment advice. People who've read one article act like geopolitical analysts. And it's not just online. In offices, how many times have you seen someone get promoted? Not because they're the best at their job, but because they're the best at pretending they know what they're doing? In politics, how often do we see leaders who speak in absolutes, who never admit when they're wrong, who make complex issues sound simple and convince millions to follow them? This is why the Dunning-Kruger effect is not harmless. It's not funny. It's dangerous. Because confidence is persuasive, and when it's not backed by knowledge, it can lead to disaster. The Stoics warned us about this too. Seneca once wrote, "It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable. But that power is destroyed by ignorance pretending to be wisdom." Ignorance pretending to be wisdom. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect. And here's the twist. It's not just other people. It's not just the loud coworker, the overconfident influencer, the clueless politician. It's also you and me, allofus.com. Because the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't a personality type, it's a human condition. We all have areas where we're standing on top of Mount Stupid, without even realizing it. The question is, are you willing to look for those areas? Are you brave enough to question your own certainty? Because the most dangerous thing about the Dunning-Kruger effect is not the people who suffer from it. It's the people who think they don't. The Stoics had a word for this kind of false confidence: hubris, arrogance, the belief that you know when you don't. They didn't need psychological studies to see it. They saw it everywhere. In the courts of emperors, on the streets of Rome, in themselves. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men to ever live, wrote in his private journal, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I will gladly change. For it is the truth I seek, not my own opinion." Think about that. The emperor of Rome, the man who commanded armies and ruled millions, was willing to say, "I might be wrong." That's not weakness. That's wisdom. The Stoics believe that arrogance blinds us, that certainty is a form of self-deception, and that the only way to become wise is to remain teachable. They practice something called intellectual humility, a mindset that says, "I do not know everything. I cannot know everything, but I can keep learning." Now, this doesn't mean you have to live in constant doubt. It doesn't mean you should never have opinions or never speak with confidence. It means you carry your knowledge lightly. You remain open to being corrected. You listen more than you speak. Because the moment you start believing you have nothing left to learn is the moment you stop growing. The Stoics also taught that we can't control the world. We can't control what others say, do, or believe, but we can control how we respond, how we think, how we question. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." The same applies to knowledge. It's not about how much you know, it's about how you handle what you don't know. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't a flaw to be ashamed of. It's a reminder that the mind is a tricky place, that confidence is not proof of competence, and that the wisest people are often the ones who doubt themselves the most. So the next time you find yourself certain, the next time you're about to correct someone, argue with someone, lecture someone, pause. Ask yourself, is this confidence or is it competence? Is this wisdom or is it ego? Because the line between the two is thinner than you think. And the Stoics knew the price of arrogance is always paid in regret. So, what do? Once you've seen the curve, Once you realize how easy it is to stand at the top of Mount Stupid, how do you make sure you don't get stuck there? The answer isn't complicated, but it's not easy either. It starts with one simple word: humility. Not the false kind. Not the "I'm just being humble" social media version. Real humility. The kind that quietly whispers to yourself, "Maybe I don't know enough yet." The first step is to question your own certainty. To develop the habit of asking, "How do I know this? Could I be wrong? What don't I know about this?" And here's the key. You don't ask those questions to weaken yourself. You ask them to make yourself stronger. The Stoics believed that wisdom was a lifelong practice, a muscle you have to train. And the way you train it is by seeking feedback, by listening, by reading the other side, by exposing yourself to ideas that challenge your beliefs. The Dunning-Kruger Effect thrives in echo chambers. In rooms where everyone agrees with you, in conversations where no one ever says, "I think you might be wrong." So leave the echo chamber. Invite disagreement, not to argue, but to understand. Another practical tool is something the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of the possible mistakes. Before you speak, before you decide, before you jump into a conversation thinking you know everything, pause and ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm missing something? What could go wrong if I act on this certainty? This isn't about paralysis. It's about preparation. And here's the truth. The more you learn, the less certain you'll feel. That's not a flaw. That's progress. Because when you truly start learning, you realize how vast the world is, how complex, how much there is you will never fully understand. And instead of feeling smaller because of that, you start to feel free. You stop needing to be right all the time. You stop arguing just to win. You start listening, not to reply, but to learn. The Dunning-Kruger Effect loses its power the moment you admit, "I don't know everything." And ironically, that's the moment you actually start becoming wise. Because it's not knowledge that makes you dangerous. It's certainty without knowledge. And it's not ignorance that holds you back. It's the refusal to recognize it. So if you want to escape the trap, if you want to climb down from Mount Stupid and start walking the real path to mastery, start with 3 words. I might be wrong. Say them often. Say them without shame, because that's not weakness. That's where real strength begins. So here we are. You've walked with me across the curve, from ignorance to arrogance to despair, and hopefully towards wisdom. And now I'll leave you with this. The world isn't short on opinions. It isn't short on confidence. Every day, everywhere you look, you'll hear voices shouting with certainty, telling you how the world works, telling you what to believe, telling you what's right and what's wrong. But here's the thing. The loudest voices are rarely the wisest. Real knowledge doesn't scream. It whispers, it questions, it listens. The Stoics knew this. They knew that the person who thinks they know everything knows nothing at all. And the person who knows how little they know has already begun to understand the universe. So next time you feel certain, next time you feel the urge to correct, to argue, to preach, pause. Ask yourself, is this confidence or competence? Is this wisdom or just the illusion of it? Because the most dangerous kind of confidence is the kind that doesn't know it's blind. And here's the twist. The most powerful person in the room isn't the one who speaks the loudest, it's the one who listens. It's the one who can look themselves in the mirror and say, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm willing to learn. That is real strength. That is how you escape the curve, not by knowing everything, but by never, ever stopping the search.